In a small wooden cabin high in the Montana mountains, an older widow and her tiny white Munchkin cat accidentally took in an orphaned bobcat, only to watch him grow 3 times bigger than his foster mom and still believe he was just a house pet. This isn't just a feel-good story about unlikely motherhood. It's a slow, gripping tug-of-war between love and the law, between armed neighbors and a woman doing everything she can to keep her wild son alive. In the end, she has to make an unbearable choice: hold on to him a little longer or let him return to the woods, where every step could be his last. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The wind had a way of finding every crack in Ellen Brooks's old mountain cabin, slipping through the seams like a cold whisper that wouldn't leave her alone. Outside, Montana was buried under a fresh storm, the kind of heavy, wet snow that swallowed sound and turned the world into a dim blur of white and gray. Inside, the only light came from a single lamp over her workbench and the orange glow of the wood stove, where a log hissed and popped as it burned down to coals. Ellen sat hunched over an old rocking chair someone from town had begged her to fix, sanding down a splintered armrest with steady, practiced strokes. The fine dust clung to the lines of her hands, catching in the cracks like pale powder. Somewhere under a neat stack of sandpaper sat a folder stuffed with health insurance paperwork and retirement statements she kept meaning to look at. But tonight, she had no patience for numbers or online banking passwords. Wood she understood. Wood did what you told it to do if you were patient enough. On the faded floral couch behind her, Pearl was a little moon of white fur curled into a tight ball, her short Munchkin legs tucked underneath so neatly it looked almost like she didn't have any. Ellen could hear the cat's soft, steady purr even over the low rumble of the storm. Every so often, Pearl's ears flicked at the creak of the rafters or the sigh of the chimney, but she didn't bother to move. This was their normal winter evening: furnace humming, clock ticking, snow doing whatever it wanted beyond the glass. The sound, when it came, was so thin and strange that at first Ellen thought it was the wind catching on the old radio antenna. A high, broken, almost metallic note that rose and then vanished. She paused, the sandpaper frozen in her hand, and held her breath. The clock kept ticking. The stove popped again. Pearl's purr continued, but a little sharper now, like a motor revving. Then it came again, stretched out longer this time, a desperate, tearing cry that didn't belong to any storm. Pearl's head shot up. Her golden eyes went wide, pupils blown black, ears pointing straight toward the front door. She slid off the couch in one fluid motion, her short legs pattering across the hardwood as fast as they could carry her. By the time Ellen had set the sandpaper down, Pearl was already at the entryway, staring at. The door, like something on the other side, was calling her by name. Ellen's chest tightened. She knew the sounds of this mountain the way other people knew traffic. The low, throaty yip of coyotes, the long, mournful call of an elk out in the timber, the strange, lonely whistle of the wind as it tunneled through the ravine. This was none of those. This was thinner, younger. "Probably a fox," she muttered, but even as the words left her lips, she knew better. Fox kits didn't cry like that in the middle of a blizzard. The third time it came, the sound snapped something open in her memory. A hospital room years ago, fluorescent lights too bright over white sheets, the hiss of oxygen, the rattling breath of a man who'd once split firewood with his bare hands. The helplessness of standing there, holding his fingers, knowing there was nothing she could fix, no piece of him she could sand down and glue back together. She wiped her hands on a rag and stood, knees aching in the way they always did when the weather turned. Pearl glanced back at her, then back at the door, tail puffed, body rigid. The cat made a small, urgent chirp, not quite a meow, as if to say, "Do you hear it too?" "I hear it," Ellen whispered. At the window, the world was a sheet of moving gray. Snowflakes hurled themselves sideways against the glass, melting as soon as they touched. Beyond the driveway, the tree line was just a line of dark smudges disappearing into nothing. The cry came again, fainter this time, and she could feel it more than hear it, like a thin wire pulled tight against her ribs. She checked the time on the old wall clock. After 9. No one should be out. No one, and nothing that wasn't in serious trouble. Common sense rose up first, steady and practical. You're alone. It's dark. The road's barely passable. Let nature do what it does. You can't save everything on this mountain. Another voice, quieter but sharper, cut underneath. If someone had said that to her in that hospital room, if they had shrugged and turned away while her husband fought for air, she would have wanted to tear their badge right off their uniform. Pearl scratched at the base of the door, claws ticking against the wood. Her tail swished, agitated, but she didn't make a sound. She only stared at the handle, then at Ellen, then back again. "All right," Ellen said, though her mouth had gone dry. "All right, all right." She pulled her old parka down from the hook, the one that still smelled faintly of chain oil and pine sap. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper. The storm's low roar grew louder as she approached the door, the cold seeping through even before she turned the knob. She slipped her feet into the boots by the mat, feeling the chill of half-dried soles, and grabbed the heavy flashlight from its spot on the shelf. For a moment, she just stood there, hand on the deadbolt, staring at the wood grain. It would be so easy to step back, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. Animals cried and died in these mountains every day, whether she looked or not. Life, like winter, didn't care about fairness. Pearl pressed her head against Ellen's ankle, purring now in a rough, insistent rhythm. Ellen looked down at the little white cat, this odd, short-legged creature someone else had thrown away when the novelty wore off, and felt a familiar heat rise behind her eyes. "Fine," she said. "We'll take a look, just a look." She turned the deadbolt. The click sounded like a decision sealing itself. When she opened the door, the wind shoved its way inside, full of ice and the sharp smell of wet pine. Snowflakes stung her cheeks, tiny pinpricks of cold against a skin that had known too many winters. Pearl stayed just inside the threshold, a small white shadow against the dark floor, not daring to cross into the storm. Ellen stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under her weight, and swept the flashlight beam across the yard. The light caught on the mailbox, the rusty truck she hadn't driven in weeks, the sagging fence line. The cry didn't come again, but the silence itself felt poised, waiting. Headlights appeared down the road, cutting through the swirling snow in 2 long spears of yellow. A truck engine growled as it crawled up the incline, tires crunching over packed ice. For one wild second, she imagined some lost tourist asking about motel rates or cheap cabin rentals, hopelessly off course in the storm. Then the truck pulled into her drive, and she saw the familiar state emblem on the door, the light bar on the roof, and the tall shape of a man in a heavy jacket stepping down onto the snow. Mark Dalton, the wildlife officer, lifted a covered plastic crate from the back of his truck. Even from the porch, Ellen could hear it then, high, broken, and very much alive, the cry of something small and terrified trapped inside. By the time Mark Dalton lifted the crate out of the truck bed, his gloves were soaked through and his fingers ached all the way down to the bone. The plastic was cold and slick under his hands, beaded with tiny drops of melted snow. Inside, something shifted and let out that same high, fractured cry, thin as a crack in glass. "Easy, kid," he murmured, more to steady himself than the animal. The porch light over Ellen's cabin threw a soft yellow circle onto the snow, turning the drifts at her doorstep the color of old cream. It was a gentle light, the kind people put over a front door when they wanted neighbors to feel welcome. It made the darkness of the woods behind him feel even deeper, like a wall of black timber pressing in. What he saw out there earlier that evening hadn't felt gentle at all. Just a few hours before, he'd been farther up the ridge, the sky still holding the last weak smear of daylight. The pines had stood in tight rows, their trunks dark and wet, snow clinging to the needles like clotted sugar. His boots made that familiar crunch squeak, sound with every step, the rhythm of a man who'd walked these game trails longer than most people kept a car. He almost missed the trap. It was tucked at the base of a fallen log, half buried under fresh powder, the rusty steel jaws disguised with a careless sprinkle of pine needles. The only reason he saw it at all was the color, a thin spray of brown-red on the snow, already going dark as it froze. The smell hit a second later, metallic and sour, riding the cold air, blood and fear and something else, the faint musky tang of wildcat. "Damn it," he whispered, more breath than sound. The bobcat mother lay a few feet away, where she'd dragged herself before the blood loss made the world tilt and fade. Her fur, a beautiful mix of tawny gold and gray, was matted and stiff. One paw was twisted at an angle that turned his stomach. Her eyes were half open, frozen that way, still catching a bit of sky. He hated that look. He saw it on deer, on foxes, on dogs that had slipped out of someone's yard because the gate latch failed and the home security system only watched the front door. People would spend a fortune on flat-screen TVs and pet insurance for their purebred puppies, then leave illegal traps to rot out here like it was still 1920. The sound that came from behind the log didn't match the size of the animal he'd just found. It was smaller, broken into little sobs, the way an infant's cry hops and stutters when it runs out of breath. He rounded the log slowly, toes feeling for more metal under the snow. There, huddled tight against the rough bark, was a scrap of spotted fur no bigger than a loaf of bread. Big ears, tufted at the tips, short tail twitching, dragging in the snow. The bobcat kitten's sides heaved with each breath, ribs sharp under the thin coat. Its eyes, too large for its face, fixed on him with a mixture of terror and wild defiance. It hissed at him, a tiny, ragged sound that would have been almost funny in another life. "Hey," Mark said softly. I know. He crouched, careful, letting his knees sink into the cold. Steam curled up from his mouth. The kitten's paws were spread wide, claws sunk into the frozen ground, as if it could hold itself in place by sheer will. A smear of dried milk clung to one whisker. When it cried again, the noise cut straight through his coat, straight through the years of training and policy manuals and briefing rooms about wildlife management and responsible veterinary care, and all the ways they tried to balance people's lives with everything that still lived in these mountains. All of that felt so small compared to one cub pressed against its dead mother in the snow. He wrapped the kitten in a thick towel from his pack. It fought him, weakly at first, then with little bursts of panicked energy. Tiny muscles trembled against his palms. Its heartbeat fluttered against his wrist, fast and uneven, like a bird trapped in a cardboard box. When he lifted it, the kitten let out a sound that wasn't a hiss or a growl, but something rawer, confused, pleading. "I'm not the one who took her," he said, voice rough. "I'm the one who showed up too late." By the time he carried the crate up Ellen's steps, the storm had thickened into a white curtain. Pearl was a bright shape at the edge of the light, her white fur almost the same color as the snow, golden eyes burning holes in the darkness. Ellen stood behind her in the doorway, parka half-zipped, gray hair flattened by the wind, concern and something like determination set in the fine lines around her mouth. Mark set the crate down gently on the porch. The kitten inside pressed its body against the slats, eyes glittering under the porch light, and let out another thin cry that seemed to fold the night in on itself. "This one," he said quietly, meeting Ellen's gaze, "didn't just lose its mother. It lost the only teacher it had. Without help, it's not going to make it through tomorrow." For a long beat, the only sounds on the porch were the wind and that thin, frayed cry inside the crate. Ellen could feel it tugging at a place in her chest she usually kept locked up with the old paperwork in her desk, health insurance forms, retirement planning brochures, all the things that said, in neat black print, that life needed to be orderly and predictable from here on out. "Bring him in," she said at last. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Mark nudged the crate over the threshold with his boot and slid it across the braided rug. The plastic scraped softly on the wood, a small, ugly sound in a room that usually held only the gentle tick of the clock and Pearl's purr. The warm air inside the cabin rushed over the crate, carrying the scent of pine smoke and coffee and old books. Pearl slipped sideways along the wall, staying just out of reach, her belly skimming the floor. Every muscle in her compact little body seemed to vibrate. Her short legs made her look almost like a white otter as she moved, low and quick, golden eyes never leaving the crate. "Let's give him some space," Mark said. He set his hat on the hook, snowflakes melting into dark spots on the brim. "If he panics and gets a claw in you, I'll be filling out incident reports until spring." Ellen fetched an old quilt from the back of the couch, the one with faded blue squares her mother had sewn before computers and online banking became part of every grown child's vocabulary. She spread it out in the center of the living room, the lamplight turning the blues and creams into something soft and inviting. "We'll try here," she said. "If he bolts, he's got nowhere to go but under the furniture." Mark studied her for a second, then nodded. He crouched, popped the latches, and slowly lifted the crate lid. The smell of damp fur and fear rose up, sharp and wild. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then two tufted ears and a pair of wide, glassy eyes appeared. Over the rim, the kitten was even smaller out in the open, his spots a smoky mix of brown and gray against his winter coat. His sides fluttered with each breath. He pressed himself against the back corner, claws scraping faintly on plastic. When Mark tipped the crate, the cub slid awkwardly onto the quilt, legs splaying, tail twitching like a broken twig. Pearl hissed, a low warning sound that rippled up from somewhere deep. Her back arched, white fur puffing until she looked twice her normal size. She took 2 stiff steps toward the quilt, then stopped, caught between curiosity and outrage. "Easy, girl," Ellen murmured. "He's just a baby." The kitten made a noise then, a raw, shredded mewl that didn't sound like it belonged in a quiet living room with framed photos and a stack of gardening magazines on the coffee table. It sounded like it had been torn straight out of the storm. Pearl's ears flicked. The hiss cut off mid-breath. She blinked, something softer flickering behind the gold. Slowly, as if her paws weighed 100 pounds, Pearl crossed the last stretch of floor. Her nose wrinkled at the strange scent. Pine, blood, cold iron. She stopped inches from the kitten. Up close, the bobcat's eyes seemed impossibly large. 2 golden-green marbles reflecting the lamp, the cat, and the dark shape of Ellen hovering at the edge of the rug. The kitten tried to stand, legs trembling. He managed one unsteady step toward Pearl before his front paw slid on the quilt, and he sagged sideways with a weak grunt. The sound was so small, so tired, that it sliced through every layer of caution in the room. Pearl lowered her head. For a heartbeat, Ellen thought she might swat him, establish the house rules with a sharp lesson. Instead, Pearl touched her nose to the kitten's forehead, inhaled once, then began to lick, brisk little strokes that rasped through the tangled fur. Mark exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Ellen felt her knees go weak. She sank onto the edge of the couch, hand pressed to her mouth, watching the tiny white cat try to wrap her small, warm body around the shaking wild thing in the center of her living room. "That's something," Mark said quietly. "Yeah," Ellen whispered. Her eyes burned, but in a good, dangerous way. "That's a family starting, whether we like it or not." The front door banged open without a knock, letting in a rush of cold air and the smell of exhaust. "Ellen, you still wanting those apple bars, or did I—" Donna stopped halfway over the threshold, her knit hat askew, a foil-covered pan in her gloved hands. Her gaze dropped to the quilt, to the bobcat kitten half buried under a white Munchkin who was washing his ears like a fussy hen. "Oh," she breathed. "Well, I'll be. You went and opened it at a wildcat daycare." Ellen laughed then, a short, startled sound that felt like the first real laugh in months. Pearl glanced up at the noise, her tongue still sticking out a little, then tucked the kitten closer as if to say, "Mine." "He needs a name," Donna added, stepping inside and nudging the door shut with her hip. "Can't just call him Trouble for the rest of his life." Ellen looked at the little spotted body, at the two big paws and the two bright eyes that had seen more than they should have. Beyond the windows, the dark line of the trees loomed, the wild world waiting. "Scout," she said softly. "We'll call him Scout." The kitten made a tiny, questioning chirp, as if trying the word on in his own mind. Pearl purred louder, the sound filling the small room like a low, steady engine. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, under the warm lamplight, an odd little family began to settle in for the night. Winter inched into spring so slowly you almost couldn't see the change unless you were really looking. One day, the snow on Ellen's porch rail seemed a little lower. The next, the icicles hanging from the eaves had shrunk to glassy teeth. The wind lost that knife edge that cut straight through her coat. Somewhere in there, without her quite noticing when, the helpless scrap on the quilt became something else entirely. Scout's paws were the first thing she really saw changing. At the beginning, they'd been almost puppy-like, too big for his skinny legs, soft as cotton under her fingertips. Now, when he padded across the kitchen linoleum, his claws clicked faintly, a sharp, dry sound, like enamel on ceramic. Each pad had toughened, darkened. He no longer skidded on the quilt. He launched. He turned the living room into his private training ground. One moment he'd be a spotted ball of fur, sleeping with his head buried under Pearl's belly. The next, he'd be crouched low behind the rocking chair, hindquarters wiggling, tail twitching like a metronome gone wild. Then, pounce. A flying blur of muscle and fur, front paws outstretched, landing full force on a stray sock, a throw pillow, the unwisely placed TV remote. More than once he chose Pearl instead. The first time he misjudged his strength, it happened so fast, Ellen's brain had to catch up afterward. Pearl was trotting across the room, short legs moving like little pistons on her way to the kitchen. Scout, twice her length now, sprang from behind the coffee table with an enthusiastic chirp. His body collided with hers mid-stride. The thump was small but sickening. Pearl rolled, a flurry of white fur and startled yowl, and slammed into the leg of the table. The remote clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Scout with one paw in the air, Ellen halfway out of her chair, her heart hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Then Pearl scrambled upright, ears flat, eyes wide. Scout lowered his head, confused, his tail drooping. He let out a questioning little sound, somewhere between a meow and a cub's grunt. Pearl stared at him, her sides heaving, and for a moment Ellen thought, "That's it. She's done. She'll walk away and never go near him again." Instead, Pearl stepped forward, bumped her head into his chest, and began to wash his face with brisk, offended licks, as if scolding him for being clumsy and forgiving him in the same breath. Ellen sat back down slowly, feeling the adrenaline drain out of her in a wave that left her arms weak. Her palms were damp. She wiped them on her jeans, aware of every creak in her knees, every ache in her lower back. Getting older meant calculating risk in ways she'd never bothered with before. What a fall would do to her hip, how long it would take to bounce back. It was the same voice that made her keep up with the boring stuff like home insurance and health insurance and checking her online banking twice a month, just to be sure. Now that voice whispered something new. You can't afford for this to go wrong. Not for you, not for them. The bobcat cub didn't stay small for long. His spots darkened into bold rosettes, his body filling out with lean muscle. When he stretched full length on the rug, he could almost nose the base of the couch and flick Pearl's tail at the same time. His eyes, once too big for his face, settled into a steady, intense gold that sometimes gave her the shivers when she caught them reflecting the lamplight at night. One morning, as she reached past him to pick up a mug, his paw shot out in play. A single claw grazed the back of her hand. The pain was fast and hot, like being pinched with a wire. She sucked in a breath, more startled than anything, and watched a thin red line beat up on her skin. Scout yanked his paw back immediately, ears low, pupils wide. He made a soft, uneasy chuffing sound, the same one he'd made the first week when she'd accidentally bumped his sore leg. "It's all right," she said, patting his shoulder. His fur was thick and warm, hiding the strength underneath. "My fault. I forgot how big you're getting." She rinsed the scratch under the tap, the cold water stinging, and dabbed it with antiseptic while Scout stared from the doorway, tail low. Pearl sat between them like a tiny referee, eyes moving from one to the other, judging. By late spring, the road up to the cabin was mostly clear, two rutted lines of dirt cutting through patches of stubborn snow. One bright afternoon, with sunlight slanting gold through the pines, Ellen heard the crunch of tires on gravel and glanced out the window to see Cal Cooper's truck pull in. Cal climbed out with his usual heavy-footed stomp, boots leaving wet marks on her dusty porch. He was a big man, all shoulders and sun-leathered skin, his ball cap pulled low, the smell of hay and diesel clinging to his jacket. He raised a hand in greeting, but his mouth was a flat line. "Afternoon, Ellen," he called as she opened the door. "Cal," she nodded. "Cows behaving themselves?" He snorted. "Cows do what cows do. It's other things I'm worried about." She let him in, mostly because that's what you did out here. You didn't leave a neighbor standing on the porch unless you wanted it talked about in town, over coffee and retirement planning brochures. Scout was in the hallway, half hidden behind the banister, his body pressed low, whiskers twitching. He watched Cal with that coiled stillness that made Ellen's neck hairs prickle. Pearl sat beside him, smaller than one of Cal's boots, but she didn't move either. Cal's gaze flicked to the movement, then landed properly on Scout. His eyes narrowed. "That him?" he asked. "The Bobcat folks have been whispering about at the feed store?" Ellen felt her stomach tighten. She'd known talk would get around. Small towns carried news faster than any internet connection, but hearing it out loud made it real in a new way. "He's just a youngster," she said. "We're working with Mark. It's temporary." Cal's jaw worked. "My wife heard one of the calves bawling last night. Found tracks along the fence line this morning. Small, but not that small. I don't mind wild things in the hills. Been ranching under these trees my whole life. But if something starts thinking my pasture is a buffet..." His eyes went back to Scout, who had not blinked once. The cub's tail tip twitched, slow and deliberate. "I'm required to protect my herd," Cal added. "The law's on my side if it comes to that." The words were calm, almost polite, but they hit Ellen like a cold splash. For a heartbeat, she saw not a neighbor she'd known for 20 years, but a man with a rifle, a shape in the snow, a story ending on the wrong kind of report. "Scout doesn't leave the house," she said firmly. "Not without one of us. And he's not hunting anything. He still thinks throw pillows are terrifying prey. Cal huffed, not quite a laugh. Just keep him where he belongs, all right? I'd hate to be the bad guy in this one. After he left, the cabin felt smaller, the air thicker. Ellen stood at the kitchen counter, looking at the smudges Cal's boots had left on the floor, while Scout rubbed against the back of her knees like any oversized house cat. The contrast made her throat tight. That night, after Pearl and Scout finally collapsed in a heap of fur at the foot of her bed, Ellen pulled out her old address book and found a card she'd been saving. Dr. Hannah Reyes, it read, in neat, bold letters. Below that, Wildlife Sanctuary Director, and a phone number scribbled in blue ink. She hesitated only a moment before dialing. The line rang against her ear, a distant, hollow sound. On the second ring, a warm, clear voice answered. "Dr. Reyes speaking." "Doctor," Ellen said, glancing toward the open bedroom door where two sleeping shapes rose and fell in the lamplight. "My name's Ellen Brooks, up near Ridgeview. I think it's time we talk about a bobcat that's getting bigger than I planned for." The snow finally gave way to rain, a steady gray curtain that turned the driveway into mud and left the pines dripping like someone had wrung out the sky. On those wet evenings, the sound of it on the metal roof was almost soothing, a slow, constant drum that made the cabin feel like the inside of a safe, old thermos. Ellen told herself they were tucked away from the world up here, like money in a good savings account, protected and private. But trouble had a way of climbing mountains. Mark had gone quiet for a week after her call. Then one afternoon he showed up at the edge of the yard again, his cruiser splattered with mud, his expression tight. "More traps," he said, leaning against the porch rail. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat onto his jacket. "Farther in this time. Whoever's setting them isn't scared of tickets or fines." Ellen's stomach sank. "You think it's just about bobcats?" "I think some folks see the woods as their personal investment portfolio," he said. "Anything that breathes is fair game." He glanced toward the house where Scout's spotted shape moved past the front window like a shadow. "And I think word's gotten around that there's a young cat up here that's not afraid of people." That night, she double-checked the latch on every door and window, something she'd always meant to do but never been fussy about. She and her late husband had talked about upgrading to a modern home security system years ago, back when they still believed they'd grow old together in this cabin. Now those glossy flyers about smart cameras and online banking alerts were stuffed in a drawer with sympathy cards and life insurance brochures. All of it a reminder that you could plan all you wanted and still get blindsided. The rain turned heavier as the sky bruised purple. The cabin lights cast warm pools on the floorboards, and the old clock's ticking grew louder in the quiet. Scout stalked a faded feather toy in the hallway, his shoulders rolling under his thickening coat. Pearl sat on the back of the couch, tail wrapped neatly around her short legs, watching him with the grave attention of a tiny queen, observing a restless prince. The attack, if you could call it that, was over in 2 seconds. Scout bunched his muscles and launched at the toy, batting it against the wall. It bounced unpredictably, skittering toward Pearl. In the same motion, Scout pivoted and lunged again, his front paws landing not on stuffed feathers, but on Pearl's small body. The sound of impact was soft but sharp, like a book dropped flat on a table. Pearl let out a shocked, strangled cry as she tumbled off the couch, hitting the hardwood with a thud that made Ellen's teeth clench. The feather toy spun away and stopped under the heater. "Scout!" Ellen was already moving, her heart punching at her ribcage. For a second, all she saw was white fur and claws and the pale flash of a paw. Scout froze. He backed up a step, ears flattened, eyes blown wide. Pearl lay, on her side, panting, staring at nothing. When Ellen scooped her up, she could feel the rapid rabbit thump of her heart, the tiny bones shivering under her palm. "It's all right, sweetheart," she murmured, voice shaking. She ran gentle fingers along Pearl's spine, searching for any wrong angle, any flinch. The cat smelled of warm fur and a faint metallic tang of fear. Pearl blinked, then focused on Scout, who crept forward with slow, miserable steps. He made that low, chuffing sound again, as if apologizing in a language his own bones understood. He lowered his head until his nose touched Pearl's paw. She hesitated, then pushed herself upright and licked his cheek once, brisk and decisive, before turning her back on him and burrowing into Ellen's chest. "You didn't mean it," Ellen told him softly, "but that doesn't change what you can do now." Later, after both animals had curled up together as if nothing had happened, Ellen sat at the kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea she couldn't taste. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. She almost didn't hear the truck at first, the engine low, headlights dimmed as it crawled up the road. She frowned and reached for the little tablet she used to check her email and pay bills. One of the cheap motion sensor cameras Mark had helped her order. Nothing fancy, not like those big city home security systems, but better than nothing. Sent a soft chime through the app. Front yard. Movement. She tapped the notification. The live feed flickered to life, grainy and gray in the low light. A man stood at the edge of her gravel drive, just beyond the reach of the porch lamp. He wore a dark coat, hood up, one hand on the stock of a rifle, propped casually against his shoulder. The camera caught just enough of his face for her to see the set of his jaw, the way he stared at the cabin like someone checking a balance sheet, deciding if the risk was worth the payoff. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just stood there, watching, while the timestamp at the bottom of the screen ticked over minute after minute. In the other room, Scout shifted in his sleep, letting out a soft, rumbling growl. Pearl's ears twitched, but she stayed pressed against his side. Ellen's throat felt dry as dust. She turned the volume up, but there was no sound on the recording but the soft hiss of rain. When the man finally moved, it was only to step back into the darkness and vanish, the rifle disappearing with him like a bad thought you couldn't quite prove you'd had. Ellen sat there a long time after the feed went still, the glow from the tablet screen painting her hands a ghostly blue. Somewhere, a notification popped up about a limited time offer on retirement planning services. She closed it with a sharp jab of her finger. For the first time since Scout had arrived, she understood something deep in her bones. The danger wasn't just out in the wild. It was standing on her driveway. Perfectly legal, and the law might well side with the man holding the gun instead of the woman trying to protect a bobcat and a white, short-legged cat who didn't know anything about property lines or livestock. The morning it happened started out so ordinary that Ellen later caught herself replaying every small sound, every color, as if one of them should have warned her. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that made the snow in the shady spots look even dirtier. Thin sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, turning her coffee the color of dark honey. Pearl snored softly on the back of a chair, a little white comma against the faded green cushion. Donna arrived just before noon, boots clomping on the porch, cheeks pink from the chill. She barged in without waiting, as usual, a foil-covered pan balanced on her palms. "Apple cake," she announced. "Figured you could use something that's not from a can or the freezer for once. All that online banking and retirement planning can wait until after dessert." Ellen snorted. "You've been snooping at my to-do list again?" They were laughing when it happened. Ellen had one hand on the pan, the other still on the door, holding it half open to let Donna in. A mild breeze slipped past them, cold but not cruel, carrying the smell of thawing earth and distant manure from Cal's ranch. Scout materialized at her legs like smoke, a blur of spots and muscle. He'd grown into himself in the last few weeks, his shoulders almost level with her knee now when he stood tall. Before she could react, he slid between her boots, claws scrabbling for purchase on the worn wood, and shot through the crack of light like it was a tunnel leading to another world. "Scout!" Ellen grabbed for his tail and caught nothing but air. The sound of his paws on the porch, thump, 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 faded into the softer rustle of dead grass. Pearl landed at her feet an instant later, short legs moving double time, but the door swung shut before the little cat could follow. Ellen's stomach dropped, as if someone had yanked the floor away. "Oh, Lord," Donna whispered, "he's out." The next minutes blurred into motion and noise, Ellen jamming her arms into her coat, Donna grabbing the truck keys off the hook, both of them yelling for Scout into the bright, indifferent air. Mark's cruiser roared up the road not 10 minutes later, gravel spitting from under his tires when he heard the crack in Ellen's voice over the phone. They fanned out across the edge of the woods, boots sinking in patches of half-melted snow, breath puffing white in front of their faces. The silence up there had a different quality than winter's hush. It was looser, full of little sounds, the drip of water, the creak of branches, the distant, anxious bawling of calves. "That way," Mark said suddenly, pointing toward the fence line that marked the start of Cal Cooper's pasture. Fresh tracks pocked the soft earth, round, wide prints, with the faint outline of pads and claws. Scouts, no question. They crossed the last line of scrub pines, and the world opened into rough brown grass and scattered slush. Ahead of them, near the low wooden fence, something moved fast. A spotted body, muscles coiling and uncoiling in long, easy strides. Scout. A few yards beyond him, a calf bawled, a high, panicked sound, its dark eyes rolling white as it stumbled away on unsteady legs. "Scout!" Ellen shouted, her voice ripping out of her throat. He hesitated mid-stride, head turning, ears flicking toward the sound he knew. The crack of the rifle hit a second later. It was a flat, brutal noise that punched the air out of her lungs. A spray of dirt leapt up near Scout's front paws. He skidded, claws tearing into the mud, eyes blown wide. The calf bawled louder. Cal stood by the fence, rifle still shouldered, his face hard as the knot in an old beam. He worked the bolt with practiced hands, the metallic clack far too loud in the open field. "Don't!" Mark's shout was sharp enough to cut. He lunged forward, placing himself between Cal and the bobcat without thinking, one hand up, the other hovering near his own holster by instinct. "Next shot, and we're doing paperwork you don't want your name on." "That thing was going for my calf," Cal snapped. "You want to pay my feed bill, Dalton? My mortgage? You gonna cover my home insurance when somebody sues after he jumps a fence?" Scout stood frozen in the churned-up mud, sides heaving, eyes flicking from the calf to Ellen to the man with the gun. His tail lashed once, twice. He trembled all over, caught in a tug-of-war older than any law, the urge to chase and the urge to answer the only voice that had ever meant safety. "Come here, baby," Ellen called, softer now, every word carrying years of loss and stubborn hope. Her hands shook. "Come on, Scout, right here." For a heartbeat, everything held still. The rifle, the man, the calf, the wildcat. Then Scout took one careful step toward her, then another, leaving deep, clear prints in the wet earth as he chose. For now, the mother over the hunt. Scout came home from the pasture on a length of rope Mark had knotted into an improvised leash, walking stiff-legged beside him like a dog that didn't quite agree with the arrangement. Mud streaked his legs and belly, drying in stiff ridges. Ellen walked on his other side, one hand hovering near his shoulder, close enough to feel the tremble under his fur each time the distant echo of the gunshot replayed in her mind. Back inside, the cabin felt different, as if the walls had shrunk an inch. The warm lamplight that usually calmed her now showed too clearly how big Scout had become, how his back nearly reached the coffee table, how his head rose above the counter when he stood on his hind legs to sniff the bread box. Pearl paced around him in tight, worried circles, her white fur a stark contrast against his mottled coat. "You all right?" Mark asked quietly, nodding toward her scratched cheek, then toward Scout. "I don't know," Ellen said. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. "Ask me again when my hands stop shaking." That night, the sound of the rifle would not leave her. It lurked behind every creak of the floorboards, every clap of wind against the window. When she closed her eyes, she saw Scout's body taut between the calf and her voice, the dirt jumping at his feet. There were no forms for this, no careful signature lines like on the health insurance and life insurance papers she'd signed after her husband died. No policy that promised in tidy print what would happen if a wild heart kept choosing home over the hunt. Dr. Hannah Reyes arrived 2 days later in a green SUV that had seen as many rough roads as Mark's cruiser. She stepped out in worn boots and a navy jacket with the sanctuary logo stitched over the pocket, her dark hair pulled back, her expression open but serious. "Ellen," she said, shaking her hand firmly. Her palm was warm and dry. "I've heard a lot about you and your unconventional family." Inside, she sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, watching Scout through the doorway as he dozed in a patch of sun, Pearl tucked against his ribs like a comma. The bobcat's sides rose and fell slowly, his whiskers twitching at some dream only he knew. "He's in good shape," Hannah said at last. "Better than I expected, honestly. You've done a remarkable job." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Ellen replied, fingers wrapped around her own mug until the ceramic pressed hot circles into her skin. "He trusts me. He trusts Pearl. He thinks this is what the world is." "And out there," Hannah said gently, nodding toward the window where the tree line loomed. "The world thinks he's a pest, or a trophy, or a threat. The law gives you some leeway with a young animal in rehab, an adult predator that's gotten comfortable around people and livestock." She shook her head. "It's a matter of time before someone demands he be removed, one way or another." Ellen stared at the wood grain of the table, the familiar swirls and knots worn smooth by years of elbows and coffee cups. "He followed my voice away from that calf." "Today he did," Hannah said. "What about next time, when you're in town getting groceries or talking to the bank about mortgage rates or sitting in a waiting room for a doctor's appointment you can't skip? What happens when instinct wins and nobody's there to stand between him and a man with a gun?" The words landed like small stones, each one adding weight to the pile already on Ellen's chest. She thought of Pearl knocked off the couch, of Cal's eyes narrowed over the rifle barrel, of the stranger in the camera feed at the edge of her yard. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Hannah folded her hands, the sanctuary logo catching the light. "We have a large, fenced habitat up at the sanctuary. Real trees, rocks, space to run and climb. We've successfully transitioned other big cats there. Cougars, bobcats, even a lynx. It's not true wilderness, but it's safe. He can hunt live prey, stay wary of humans, learn to live by his own choices. And he won't be in the crosshairs of your neighbors." "Safe," Ellen repeated. The word tasted both comforting and bitter, for him, and for everyone else. "For you," Hannah added softly, "you've already lost one life you thought you'd share this cabin with. I doubt you have room left in your heart for another preventable tragedy." The cabin grew very quiet. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Ellen looked out at Scout again. Pearl had rolled onto her back, short legs in the air, batting lazily at his chin. He nuzzled her with surprising delicacy, careful not to let his teeth catch her fur. "I feel like I'm being asked to give him up," she said, voice rough. "After everything, after that trap in the trees, after that night on my rug, you're being asked to keep him alive," Hannah said, "to give him a life that fits the body he's growing into. That's not giving up. That's loving him past the part that's comfortable for you." The truth of it stung worse than any scratch. They set the date for the move a few days later, when the road to the sanctuary would be clear and the vet on staff could be on hand. Mark promised to drive up behind them, just in case, though they both knew he needed it as much for himself as for any official reason. The night before, Ellen dragged an old travel crate out of the shed, the plastic dulled and scuffed from years of use. She washed it down, the hose water cold on her fingers, and dried it with an old towel until the surface squeaked. Inside, she laid the worn blue and cream quilt, the one that still held whispers of wood smoke and Pearl's fur. Scout watched from the doorway, head tilted, tail swishing in slow arcs. "This is just for the ride," she told him, more to steady her own breathing than to inform him. "You like rides, remember? You cried all the way here the first time." He stepped into the crate without hesitation, sniffing the familiar fabric, then turning in a slow circle before settling his haunches. There was hardly room now between his shoulders and the walls. When she closed the door, his eyes filled the little window. Pearl jumped up on top of the crate, small paws spread, leaning down to peer in. She rubbed her cheek against the plastic, then stretched, claws making a faint, scratchy whisper. "Tomorrow," Ellen said, resting her forehead briefly against the crate's warm surface. The plastic smelled faintly of soap and cat, and something wild underneath. "Tomorrow we do the right thing, even if it breaks my heart a little." Scout blinked slowly, then pressed his nose to the grate, where her hand lay. In the quiet cabin, with the wind soft outside and the clock ticking steady, it felt like the closest thing they would ever share to a promise. The morning they took Scout to the sanctuary, the sky was the pale, washed-out blue of an old bed sheet, stretched thin over the mountains. Frost silvered the grass, crunching under Ellen's boots as she and Mark carried the crate to the SUV. The plastic sides rattled faintly with each step, and the quilt inside, her mother's blue and cream squares, bulged where Scout's weight pressed against it. When Mark set the crate down to open the hatch, Ellen finally saw the size of him clearly in the cold light. Scout shifted, turning so his shoulders jammed against the little window. His head alone looked almost as big as Pearl's whole body. Tufted ears brushed the top, golden eyes filling the square as he peered out. Pearl hopped down from the porch rail and trotted over on her short legs, breath puffing in tiny white clouds. Standing beside the crate, she barely reached the midpoint of his chest. When he lifted a paw to press against the grate, it spread wider than her face. "He's outgrown us," Ellen said softly. The words hurt, but there was no meanness in them, only the simple truth. Scout chuffed, a low, rumbling sound. Pearl rose onto her hind paws, front feet braced against the crate, and pushed her nose to the metal. For a moment they just stayed like that, his huge, spotted bulk and her little white figure, whiskers nearly touching, breath fogging the cold steel between them. Hannah closed the hatch with a careful click. "You can follow us up," she told Ellen. "Stay as long as you need." The drive to the sanctuary wound higher into the hills, past stands of dark fir and wide patches of snow still clinging in the shadows. The SUV's heater hummed, blowing air that smelled faintly of dust and pine. Ellen sat in the passenger seat of Mark's cruiser behind them, watching the boxy shape of the crate through the rear window, feeling each bend in the road like a small turn inside her ribs. The sanctuary wasn't a grand place, no glossy visitor center, just a cluster of low buildings and stretches of tall fencing that glinted dull silver in the weak sun. But when they opened the back gate and slid Scout's crate up to the habitat door, she saw trees inside, real ones, and rocks warmed by patches of light, and a trickle of water flashing through the grass like a dropped ribbon. Hannah unlatched the crate and stepped back. For a moment, Scout didn't move, his body a tense shadow behind the dark opening. Then he stepped out, one paw at a time, claws sinking into the damp earth. His head lifted, nostrils flaring as he tasted the air. Such pine, cold water, the layered scents of other wild things. His muscles rippled under his coat as he walked forward, every inch of him suddenly, undeniably feline in a way no living room could hold. "Hey, Tish," Ellen called, voice catching. "Scout." He glanced back over his shoulder. For a heartbeat, she saw both cats at once, the wobbly scrap from the trap in the trees, and this powerful, coiled creature so much larger than his foster mom. His gaze shifted past her to where Pearl sat in her carrier on the ground, pressed against the bars. Hannah crouched and unlatched that door too, just enough. Pearl slipped out, the cold making her toes curl. She padded up to the fence, stopping where Scout's shadow fell across her in stripes. He lowered his head until his forehead nearly brushed the wire. Ellen watched them rub against either side, the fence humming softly under the pressure, a thin, vibrating line between the life they'd shared and the one opening ahead. "Time to go," Mark said gently after a while. His hand was warm on her shoulder. "Let him learn what he's meant for." Scout watched as they walked back to the vehicles. When the engines turned over, he gave a single, low call. Nothing frantic, just an acknowledgement, a goodbye in his own language. Then he turned and trotted toward the rocks, tail high, vanishing into the dappled shade. In the months that followed, the cabin felt too quiet and too small all at once. Pearl seemed to take up more space just by being there. Sleeping on every chair, draping herself over Ellen's lap whenever she sat down to sort through the stack of life insurance forms and home insurance renewals she'd been avoiding. On slow afternoons, she'd open her laptop, check her online banking, glance at retirement planning numbers and mortgage rates, not because she cared about the exact figures in that moment, but because the familiar columns and neat rows were soothing in their own paper-dry way. Numbers behaved, hearts did not. Then, one crisp morning in late fall, Ellen opened her email and saw a message from Hannah. No subject line, just a little paperclip icon. Her fingers tingled as she clicked. The video was shaky phone footage, colors a bit washed out, but she knew Scout the instant he trotted into frame. He was fully grown now, muscle rolling under a thick winter coat, spots bold against the tawny fur. He bounded up a rocky rise with ease, leaping from stone to stone, then dropped suddenly into a slow, careful crouch. A smaller shape wobbled into view, a new bobcat kitten, all ears and clumsy paws. It swatted at Scout's tail, missed, and nearly pitched forward. Scout turned, nudged the little one upright with his nose, then laid down and rolled halfway onto his side. The kitten climbed onto his chest with delighted determination, batting at his whiskers. Scout tolerated it all with a patience that made Ellen's throat tighten. "Looks like your boy's paying it forward," Hannah's voice said softly over the clip. "He's doing all right, Ellen. Better than all right." That night, the first real snow of the season came in on a quiet wind. It laid a thin white sheet over the steps and blanketed the tops of the firs, softening every edge. Ellen woke in the dark hours before dawn with a feeling she couldn't name, a nudge at the back of her mind, like someone saying her name from far away. Pearl was not on the bed. She slipped into her boots and shrugged on her robe, the air cold enough to sting her nose. At the front door, she hesitated only a second before opening it. The night spilled in, crisp and still, full of that faint, clean scent that only comes when snow is brand new. Pearl stood on the porch, tail straight, staring at the yard. Ellen followed her gaze. Across the powdery surface of the drive, circling the cabin in a slow, deliberate loop, ran a trail of tracks. Not the dainty ovals of a house cat or the neat cloven marks of a deer. These prints were wider, each one stamped with 4 distinct toes and the hint of claws, a bobcat's trail, big and sure. They led along the fence past the front steps, pausing near the window where Scout used to sit and watch the world. Then they angled back toward the tree line, disappearing into the darker scratch of the woods. Ellen's breath left her in a soft cloud. Her heart thumped once hard. "Well," she whispered. Pearl descended the 3 steps slowly, nose working, whiskers forward. She sniffed one print, then another, tail flicking. For a long moment she stood there, paws cold in the snow, as if listening to something Ellen couldn't hear. Then she made a small, satisfied chirp and turned back toward the house, trotting inside with the smug little swagger only a cat can manage. Ellen lingered on the porch a minute more. Logic told her it could be any bobcat, moving through the hills, hunting voles and rabbits, skirting the edge of human light. The sanctuary was miles away, with plenty of fences between here and there. It made no sense to believe otherwise. And yet, she looked at the circle of tracks hugged so close to her walls, the pause by the window, the way Pearl had tested the air and relaxed, and chose, gently, to let her heart decide. "Good boy," she said softly to the cold, white yard, "wherever you are." Inside, the cabin was warm and golden again. Pearl waited on the couch, eyes half closed, already curling into the spot where Scout used to sprawl. Ellen settled beside her, resting one hand on the small, familiar rise and fall of the Munchkin's breathing. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a wild bobcat was running under the same sky, carrying with him the memory of a quilt on a cabin floor, a woman's steady hands, and a tiny white foster mother who'd taught him, for a little while, what home felt like, so that letting him go could also be a way of keeping him forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.